Hi, my name is Ilya Zlotnik, advisor and partner with Vivaldi Capital Management, and welcome to Journeys to the Summit. Today I have Josh Rogers joining me. Josh is the founder and CEO of Arete Wealth, an independent broker-dealer and registered investment advisor that provides wealth management services to its clients. Josh is also a man of many talents, and when he's not busy growing a business, he's also an author, a film producer, and has many passions in the fine arts world. Josh, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, man. Wouldn't miss it.
Thank you.
When you called and asked, I wouldn't say no.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say that Josh was my first manager and really leader out of college. I went to Indiana University. I started finance. My parents were immigrants, so I didn't really know what I was going to do. I had no path. And when we were interviewing with you, whatever you said in that first meeting, you convinced me to join. And what's interesting is 20 years later, can't believe it's been 20 years, I'm still in wealth management. I love the business. It's a perfect fit for me. And I think you can agree there's so much opportunity in the future. But what's interesting is back then, it couldn't have been a more unnatural fit. You know, I came from an immigrant background. I didn't grow up with wealth. So when you said go out and find your friends and family and pitch them financial planning services, I had no friends or family that were good fits. Also, for me, the scariest thing at that time was public speaking, right? So those were the combinations there. Yet over that 18 to 24-month period, you helped navigate me to success. So I want to thank you for that.
Absolutely.
I do want to spend some time talking about your approach to leadership and building teams. So you've been successful with that at Arete and other places. But before we do that, let's go back to when you were at school, what you studied, what you initially wanted to do, and how you pivoted to business and eventually to wealth management.
Okay. All right. Well, I was thinking about this actually this morning because I knew you were going to ask this question, and I thought to myself, boy, all right, I have had, you know, how a lot of times in life, the things that are your greatest strength can also kind of be one of your greatest weaknesses, or one of your, but it's kind of a question of how do you transform your weaknesses into a strength, at the same time acknowledge them. And so one of my greatest weaknesses is that I tend to be historically, I've been a man of action. Mm-hmm. I've been a man who is very decisive in making decisions. Now, the downside to that is that sometimes maybe I should have maybe thought things through a little bit more. And so, not to bring astrology into it, but I'm an Aries, which means one of the elements of an Aries sun sign is that you have a tendency to charge headlong into things.
It's interesting you say that. One of the quotes I still remember you saying back at Ameriprise is, "On the bones of hesitation lie the plains of those that fail."
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's
something like that. I think I messed it up. I still remember you saying that.
That sounds very much like me. Very much like me. I'm not sure. That's not really a Sun Tzu quote because he would be a little more hesitant. But I think it's. I'm not sure where I got that one from. It's probably from some great Roman general or something.
Yeah.
Part of it, like similar to you, I didn't grow up with wealth either. My dad was a lifelong captain in the Navy, and he was a big military historian. My mom was a civil servant with the Environmental Protection Agency their whole lives. But my dad definitely he really steeped in me this kind of like a lot of military history, a lot of philosophy of great generals and captains and so forth. So anyway, that's probably where I picked up a lot of the leadership knowledge over time. Anyway, getting back to your original question. So the story kind of goes like this. I we'll go back to I was really good at debate in high school.
Okay.
And I applied before there was something called early decision. There was something called early action, which you could apply early, but you didn't have to go to that school. So I applied early action at Dartmouth, which had a really great debate program. And I kind of thought I was going to go in the direction of being a politician, something along those lines, lawyer. But politics was really what I was really interested in when I was young. And then I met a girl. And that girl was going to school at George Washington University in D.C. And, you know,
There's always a girl in a good
there's
story.
always a girl. And I sort of just, and so I said, oh, I
made
need
that
to be,
mistake too.
yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. I know we've talked about that. And so I decided I need to be closer to DC. So as like kind of my backup, I decided to apply to Johns Hopkins University, where my parents both really wanted me to go into biomedical engineering. And my dad wanted me to go into, if you're not going to go to a service academy, because he went to Kings Point, the Merchant Marine Academy. He said, if you're not going to go to Army or Navy, then I want you to do Army ROTC. And I want you to study biomedical engineering. So I sort of more or less like that was like the compromise. Okay, I can be close to this girl, but I'll do what my parents want me to do. So I went to Johns Hopkins University. Didn't like it at all. Did not like biomedical engineering. Just didn't feel like I was getting a good education. So after my first year, against my parents' advice, I transferred to a small liberal arts college called St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, and Santa Fe, New Mexico, to study the great books of Western civilization, which I absolutely loved. And I've been on the board of that school now for approximately 14 years now. And my older son goes there now, is about to graduate. So that was a really good decision, but that was like one of many of these kind of hard pivots that I've made in my life. So fast forward, I wanted to be a philosophy professor next. But then on the other hand, I didn't really want to be poor. And then that same girl, at least I stuck with her. We ended up magically, after I graduated, we were in New York, and then. Long story short is she, got pregnant with our first child, with my daughter, and I thought, okay, I need to provide for my family.
Yeah.
So then I went to law school. So I went to Georgetown Law School, but then after my 1L year there, I got an opportunity to go to New York to be involved in an early internet entrepreneurial venture called Walker Digital, which was an intellectual property studio founded by a guy named Jay Walker, where we were inventing e-commerce business processes and then patenting them. And so this was what I call it Internet 1.0. So right now we're in the late 90s right now. And so I decided that this gentleman that had helped me with applying for the Rhodes Scholarship, I made it to a finalist, final 32 for the Rhodes Scholarship, didn't make it to the actual 16. But I met this guy who had graduated from the Santa Fe campus of St. John's College a number of years ago. And bottom line is he got me this job at Walker Digital. So now I'm inventing e-commerce business process patents. And it's there's a whole long story behind that, but basically to cut it short, those patents ended up becoming Priceline.com. And so that was a really fun sort of experience. And I got a lot of stock options in Priceline.com. And then we went public. And when we went public, Jay, who was kind of like my guy who hired me, I was like the third employee. He got sort of moved by the board into just being into a chairman of the board role, got moved out of being CEO. They brought in this guy from Citibank named Richard Braddock to be the new CEO. And he promptly fired me and Andrew. And said, it was a very nice firing though. It's kind of like, he brought us both in. He's like, listen, you guys are too young. You guys are really smart. He's like, I give you credit. That was really cool. This whole reverse auction, name your own price system. But like, you guys have no business experience whatsoever in actually running a business. So he said, you guys need to go get like an MBA or something and go get some experience. Fortunately, all of that stock that I had was actually, I say fortunately, it was all locked up. I couldn't touch it for like 3 years. It was not, and so that was good because when we IPO'd, the stock took off. But then in March of 2000, in the big internet bubble burst, the Priceline stock went down below like $3. And so on paper, at one point, I was at that time, what was I? I was like 25. And, on paper, I was worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I couldn't sell the stock. And thank God I couldn't sell it because I might have panic sold. Yeah. And so anyway, long story. So bottom line, now all of a sudden I have nothing again. And I like maxed out my credit card at Barney's like an idiot. and so I was living in New York. Anyway.
You were dressing nice.
Yeah, right. I've always liked to dress nice because I think it's because my dad didn't care about fashion at all. But
he's in the service. He's
exactly. Yeah, he was a Navy guy. But I had a great, my maternal grandfather was an awesome role model for me. He was an entrepreneur. When he came back from World War II, he started his own grocery store in Washington, D.C. called Pershing Market. It was on Pershing Street. And he ended up building that into like a 13-store grocery store sort of chain and exited that pretty successfully in like the mid 80s, sold it to Giant Food. So he was a guy who kind of taught me about the finer things in life and brought me, I mean, he was a self-educated art historian. So he became a docent at the National Galleries of Art in Washington, D.C., took me there every other weekend. So that's how I fell in love with art history and got into that side of my life. So anyway, he was a great inspiration for me on a lot of levels. So the next pivot was after Priceline, I was like, all right, what do I do? So I just knew I needed to make money. And this is where I finally landed into this business. So another friend of mine from St. John's College was working at a stock brokerage firm called Prime Charter Limited in Midtown Manhattan, which was founded by basically a lot of the top refugees of Drexel Burnham Lambert after Michael Milken kind of went under for the junk bond scandal.
Yeah.
So they all fled. Drexel Burnham Lambert started a new firm called Prime Charter Limited. That's where I got my Series 7 license. That's where I learned the business. And it was kind of it wasn't like as bad as Boiler Room or Wolf of Wall Street, but it was still in the same vein. I mean, we were using Bloomberg terminals to determine who the C-suite were of publicly traded companies, and we could get their phone numbers off of the Bloomberg terminal. And then it was still cold calling them.
And that was back when people would pick up.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Yeah, of course. Yeah, that was even, now we're in, I mean, I think we had cell phones, but it was like we had cell phones in like 2000, 2001, but they were just like simple flip phones.
Yeah.
And people.
The Razor.
Yeah, right. Yeah, people picked up like their landlines all the time, or you would deal with their secretaries and then you'd get through them. And honestly, in that time, people wanted to hear like a hot stock recommendation. It was kind of like sport, I think, for a lot of these guys. They would oftentimes, even if they had their safe money at like Merrill Lynch, they like to take a flyer here or there from a guy who called them and sounded like he knew what he was talking about. So I was very good on the phones, and I was able to build up a pretty nice book of business. But it felt kind of gross to me. It felt very salesy. It felt, it was very transactional, the kind of the New York style.
Yeah.
And I thought, this doesn't really it didn't feel right with me. And so that's where I actually found out more about American Express Financial Advisors, our previous firm, which was more financial planning oriented, and at least kind of felt to me like we were actually helping people. We were actually doing good work. We were doing a financial plan. We were, actually sitting down with people and saying, okay, let's talk about your goals for, kids' education. Let's talk about, your goals for retirement. Let's talk about like making sure that, you've done all the right insurance planning and all those sorts of things. So the whole thing felt a lot better to me. It didn't feel quite as grimy. And so I kind of took my little book of business that I had developed in New York, and I went over to American Express Financial Advisors.
So you had some of these people follow you?
Yes, I did have some of them follow me. And that kind of made me in their program. So the Amex way was to hire sharp young kids out of college like you and who really had no book of business, and then either go after their natural market or cold calling, but it was an easier form of I think when you came on board,
we might have still had fish bowls.
Yeah, we didn't have American Express card member leads anymore in your.
There were some leads coming.
A few. Okay, yeah. Well, when I started there, it was like shooting fish in a barrel, because we literally had we had American Express card members that had specifically in their statement, they would say, yes, I'm interested in invest more in information. Have someone call me about investments, right? So literally they were like saying, please call me.
Yeah.
They would hand over these leads. And I remember when I first arrived there, it was a lot of young recruits, a lot of people coming right out of college. And they were like, oh, I don't know what to do with calling. And of course, I'm like a practice pro at that point. Plus I already have a book of business. So I just I must have converted 9 out of 10 of these American Express card member leads. I thought it was so easy. So I basically was able to build a very successful practice at American Express Financial Advisors very early on. And then that's when they promoted me to being like a district manager in Montgomery County, Maryland. And so that's kind of that's maybe I should stop talking, but that's kind of the process of how the whole thing was how I got started at American Express.
Yeah. And then when did you move to Chicago?
So that was I still had a practice. I was a district. I was an advisor, but still had my book of business. Became a district manager for Montgomery County, Maryland. Also, this is kind of like I liked public speaking. It goes back
Yeah.
to my thing with debate in high school. I really
It was always
I-
natural for you.
it was always really natural for me. I like even when I was in kindergarten, we did a school play where it was a circus, and I was like nominated to be the ringmaster. You know, and then in second grade when we did the school play, it had to do with like Abraham Lincoln or something like that, and the Gettysburg Address. And there's all these kids, but I was chosen to be Abraham Lincoln.
I was the one playing the xylophone.
So yeah, I was the one who I like rattled off the Gettysburg Address, you know, even in second grade. So that part.
I imagine you as a kid with a deep voice.
Oh yeah, and I, you know, the fake beard, you know, and everything, yeah, top hat. So yeah, I've always loved the public speaking aspect of it, and so I think and frankly, I really was genuinely enthusiastic about what American Express Financial Advisors had done for my career. I mean, I remember since I was tearing through those card member leads and I was doing really well, you know, by the time I was, I'm trying to remember the year, but it was probably like when I was like maybe 27 or so, 28. You know, I remember breaking the barrier of making $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
And at that time, that was a big deal, you know,
Yeah.
and I felt pretty good about that. And so to me, I felt like it was a really good firm. I was very passionate about it. So when they put me in charge of starting to recruit, you know, young people and you know, do those speeches like at campuses and so forth. I think I was pretty effective at that, at pulling people in. Now at the same time, I also kind of had a good sense for who I thought could make it and who I thought wasn't going to make it either. So I built a pretty large and successful, what they would call like district, which was basically like a sales team of like 15. And then in 2005, 2003, late 2003, they offered me the opportunity to come to Chicago and be like the complex manager for the employee division in Chicago, which at the time was the worst performing market group in the whole firm in all of American Express Financial Advisors. So I had never been to Chicago before. As far as I was kind of like Woody Allen, like Woody Allen line in Annie Hall, where she said something about she's going to L.A. and he's like, wait, there's like life outside the island of Manhattan. What are you talking about? You know, anything he says the only advantage I've heard of in Los Angeles is you can make a right turn on red.
Okay.
And you know, but anyway, in my mind, if it wasn't connected on the Metro line or Amtrak line between DC and Boston, basically there was no other. It doesn't exist. So when I came to Chicago, I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. And I basically told my wife and my, you know, at that time, by that point we'd had 2 kids. And I said, look, this is a great opportunity. Let's go to Chicago. So that's what we did in late 2003, early 2004.
Got it. Well, I joined in 2006, and I think I started getting into production 2007. So that was a few years later.
Yeah.
And then there was, and I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but obviously there was some tension there, political tension. I feel like within Ameriprise that maybe 12 or 18 months after I joined, you
2007. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 2007. I mean, but basically in some sort of a bizarre, I don't know, I was advocating, we had become the number one market group, and our office, that branch office that you worked in, we were the number one branch office in the whole country for, you know, multiple years back.
I remember
to back.
that we were doing so
Yeah,
well.
yeah, exactly. And so then once again, they were at these big national conferences for what then became Ameriprise in 2005 when American Express spun off the financial advisory unit. They asked me to speak at these big national conferences, and I started advocating that because the cold calling was going away with the new laws that were coming in place, as you recall, you know, where and so the opportunity for young people coming right out of college to be able to actually build a book of business, I saw it as dwindling. You know, it was getting harder and harder.
Which is what has happened.
It's exactly what's happened, right? You know, and you know, all the methods, like whether it be, you know, the seminars, the lunch and learns.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, just the mere fact that it was nearly impossible to call someone and get them to pick up.
Yeah.
As the world kind of transitioned into cell phones with caller ID and then the do not call list. So what I saw was that the opportunity for us to continue to grow in that manner was not going to be there, and that we needed to shift our strategy to basically recruiting what we called experienced advisors, people who already had a book of business from other firms.
P2 was it?
Yeah, P2 was the independent contractor division, but whether it was independent contractor or employee division, it doesn't really matter. We needed to shift our whole entire strategy of like how we were going to be growing the business. And initially there was for whatever reason, a lot of resistance to that. And so in some bizarre, weird scenario, the best way I put it is for a little while they had a bank, and we had a client, a big client that was in our branch that had like, I don't know, $10 million in those old, basically, remember they were like CDs. I forget what they called them, but they were essentially CDs that we offered.
Okay.
And anyway, they owned a insurance company. They needed someone to verify that that they had this money on file, and so, or on with us, and that it was locked in. And so I was presented with this piece of paper to confirm it, and I did. And apparently someone at American Express Bank said that I was like acting outside of my purview by confirming this, and they sort of ginned that up into this big thing. And long story short is they exited me. So totally without my knowledge, it was just kind of like off with your head.
So you didn't agree with them in terms of like the direction that you wanted to go, and then they just made they kind of ginned something up to get rid of you.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Which was probably one of the best things that happened to you potentially.
Yes, absolutely, it was.
It's amazing how that happens.
It was the best. It was, well, I've already brought in astrology already first thing, so I may as well bring in like religion or God. I mean, I do look at it as it is amazing how, if you, in retrospect, sometimes you can see these events that happen in your life, and you're just like, wow, that was actually, even though at the time it was really painful, it was actually like, thank goodness for this course correction.
Yeah, but it goes back to what you were saying in terms of like, if you're not taking action and you're not doing those things and bumping heads, stuff like this, you're just gonna go steadily along the same path, and maybe you won't grow as much in life.
That's true. I mean, and you'll, it's like, since some of the part of the topic, you're part of what you're focusing on with this series is, entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
I do think that, entrepreneur, you hear the term in Silicon Valley, move fast and break things, right? That's a common refrain. But it is, I was thinking again about this morning in preparation for this, that things that you really do have to sometimes just go for things in life, and you are going to end up, there's going to be failures. There's going to be setbacks. There's going to be things that are painful at that time. But I still think it's just, that it's like nothing ventured, nothing gained. You're not going to move, you kind of have to have the courage to try to move forward and make some bold decisions and recognize that there's a very good chance that you might fail. But if you don't do that, then like nothing really moves. There's no dynamism in this world.
The other interesting thing is the more you do it, the more you fail. It just becomes like a muscle, just like anything else. You're like, oh, I've been here before. I'm going to get out of it. And and it's versus the first time you do it.
Oh, it's so painful and so stressful, and you think the world's coming to an end. I mean, that's so true. The more bad things that you've gone through, it just toughens you up, and it makes you so much more equanimous about all kinds of various different challenges. I do remember, I'm not a fan of her at all, but I thought this was a very good phrase. And I went to an interview of Hillary Clinton back when she wrote that book after she got out of the Obama administration. And Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago, was interviewing her, and she said something to this effect, that if you're going to be in public life, you better have skin as thick as a rhinoceros.
I bet.
And that is always, that image has always stuck with me in terms of like a mixture. It's not just, there's toughness and then there's strength too. Those are two different things. Like pure toughness is like, all right, I can take a needle to the eyeball and I'm not wincing. But like, I think strength is more along the lines of like, all right, when these bad things happen or you experience setbacks, you do allow yourself to feel them. There is like, you have emotions. You have to kind of acknowledge that. You can't just be a robot. But strength is about allowing those emotions and the anxiety and the fear and all that to kind of like run through you, but then to have the fortitude, this sort of soulful fortitude to overcome that and still keep pushing forward. That's the difference between strength and toughness.
Absolutely. You feel those feelings. They might linger for a period of time, maybe less the more you do it, but then you kind of recenter yourself and then you move on and use that as energy for your next battle, so to speak.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's go back to that. Okay, so you have two young kids. You moved to Chicago. you get pushed out. You didn't even know it.
Right.
So what's your mindset like there, and what do you do?
Yeah, that's a great. I mean, yeah, and I had overhead because like
Yeah.
I
Two little kids.
I had two little kids. I still like
Barney's credit card.
yeah, right. I still like to. The Barney's credit card debt had been clear, but I was making a good amount of money at that point, and as any, how old was I at that point? I was like, this would have been 2007, so I was 32 years old, right? Yeah, so I'm, it's like I was doing well, so I built up a lifestyle. So I'm living in this, you probably were there. I was living in a pretty big house in Barrington Hills.
Yeah.
And my wife wasn't working. And so, you've got that, once again, you're a father, what is the virtuous thing to do? You need to provide for your family. And so I sort of thought about a lot of things. I try to survey the landscape at that point, but the need to, I think, from my perspective, to provide and to still making money. Like, I wasn't going to say, all right, I'm going to go become a philosophy professor. Now I'm going to go get a PhD. I couldn't bring myself to that. So, I've always been pretty well networked a lot. I've always shook a lot of hands, made a lot of friends. So one of my former, he was, do you remember Ken Franklin by any chance? Okay.
Yeah.
So Ken had gotten promoted out of our office, had become a field vice president in the New York area. And so when I got fired, of course I talked to Ken, and Ken said, hey, I've met this guy in New York, and he is like a investment banker that finds broker dealers. He's like, you should start your own firm. And I had been kind of thinking about that anyway, because I had a couple of different visions of like how the business was going to go. And I saw also back in 2001 when Elliot Spitzer he basically kind of destroyed the A-share mutual fund business and the B-share mutual fund business. So that started pushing a lot of business over toward RIA. Even all the way back in 2001, you could see like margin compression on all the kind of more traditional publicly traded products was just shrinking. You started to see like a real move toward the fee-based RIA business, and then I also started to see that there was still a desire amongst the mass high net worth for something a little different than just like an ETF portfolio or a variable annuity or a separately managed account of some kind. There's going to be a little bit more. They need to feel like they're getting something that like the family offices are getting, or that the endowments are getting. And so I sensed that there was a need for, the reason I felt I needed to have my own firm was because any big existing firm was basically just going to play it safe. And so so I knew that I needed to start my own firm in order to be able to start to offer the kind of product, the sort of alternative investment product, the sort of modified endowment strategy that I thought that those people who have between, say, $1 million to $25 million of investable assets were really looking for. So that's why I decided to start my own firm. So Ken put me in touch with this investment banker in New York. He basically helped me to find a firm that had become an NASD member in 1999 called Keystone Securities, that was owned by a father and son that were primarily using it to raise capital to create or buy minor league baseball teams and build new minor league baseball team stadiums.
Okay.
And but the two of them were really more investment bankers. They did not want to deal with, at the time, the NASD and then what became FINRA. They just didn't want to deal with the regulation. So I bought that firm, Keystone Securities, from them. I basically cashed out all my Priceline stock.
You still have Priceline stock.
Right. So I'd held on to my Priceline stock all the way until 2007.
Oh, wow.
When I got fired, that I was like, all right, well, it's now or never. Thank God at that point, Priceline had been one of the best performing stocks in the S&P 500.
And that was before things crashed. Right?
Yeah, that was before. If you're talking about 2008,
So it was good from that perspective.
The timing was good. So once again, maybe somebody's watching out for me. So I sold out of all my Priceline stock, and I took out a mortgage on my house. I cashed in all my 401ks and IRAs, all the savings I had. And I basically just moved all my chips in the middle of the table.
That's awesome.
And I bought this firm, Keystone Securities, and then I started the RIA. So when I started the RIA, I knew I wanted to call the firm Arete, which is ancient Greek word that first appears in Homer's Iliad, describing the excellence of Achilles. But it's been more expanded upon in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, where he sort of talks about Arete is this perfect mixture of personal excellence combined with moral virtue. And so I knew I wanted to call the firm that. Also because it's always good to start a company with the letter A, because you come up higher in all the alphabetical
it's an awesome
rankings.
name.
And so so I started the RIA, and that was RSA Wealth Advisors, because that was a de novo brand new company. But the broker dealer was still Keystone Securities, and you're not allowed to change the name until you go through this whole lengthy process with FINRA called a 1017 process, where they have to approve the new owner, and they have to approve the name change, and they have to approve all the different lines of business that you want the firm to do. So it took me all the way until February of 2008 when FINRA finally approved my 1017 application. That's when I was able to change the name of the broker-dealer from Keystone Securities to RTA Wealth Management. So I had RTA Wealth Management, I had RTA Wealth Advisors, the RIA, and I had RTA Insurance Agency, the Life and Health Insurance Agency, and all owned by just like a common holding company. So that's pretty much that's the original genesis, and back in 2007.
That's an amazing story. And then, but right after that, you build all that, and then you cash in everything and put all the chips in the middle, and then you have the great financial crisis.
Right.
So how did you navigate through that environment?
So it turned out that actually, again, like this is where, maybe, you have to say, it's a combination of boldness, risk, willingness to take big risks.
Yeah.
With a little bit of luck as well, because everyone, yeah, exactly. Everyone would always say, "Oh my God, I can't believe you started this company kind of right into the teeth of the 2008 financial crisis." Well, the good news was actually, there's an inverse way of looking at it, is that I didn't have any like legacy bad investment product, like all include like UBS was battling the auction rate securities problem, bank, all of them,
And they were owning a bunch of mortgages.
That's right. They all had tons of mortgages. They all had a bunch of CMBS exposure. So they had basically what you'd call a colossal product failure
Legacy
across
of
the
shit.
board. Right. And then on top of it, you had Merrill Lynch basically ended up selling themselves to Bank of America, and then so all the brokers were like, well, I'm gonna be working with a bank. I don't want that. And so there was that period in 2008 where basically the big name, the brand names, had a very low reputation. I mean, if you recall that era, everybody was like blaming like the big Wall Street banks for the entire financial crisis.
Yeah.
So there was a short little moment there where actually being associated with Merrill or Morgan Stanley or UBS was actually kind of like bad for your reputation as an advisor. You weren't getting any new clients, were leaving. Everyone was actually going toward independence.
Yep.
Because independents were not being blamed for the creation of the financial crisis.
No, I remember because I left the Ameriprise. I joined TD, which was a Canadian bank at the time, or associated with Canada, and it had no mortgages on its balance sheet, so it was clean.
Right.
And we were sending business to RIAs at the time, so we were growing and acquiring clients.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that's it. People, that was the one. That was actually 2008 was an accelerator to this whole secular shift that's occurred toward the RIA, kind of style, or the standalone RIA. And my friend Elliot Weissbluth was also starting Hightower at the same time, and he was, one of his big things was he was kind of saying, look, we're fiduciaries. We're independent. We're never going to push any of this like proprietary product that the investment bank wants. We're not going to push these IPOs on you. We're just totally independent, and we're going to only, it was almost like I used to joke with him that his basic message was, we're as pure as monks, and we're your monk financial advisor. If you want someone with absolute moral purity, hire us. Which of course I was joking because I felt like a lot of times it was a little hyperbolic, the way in which he would sort of push this idea that, as like, it's not the case that every wirehouse rep is just like a stooge of the institution, but it's also not the case that every independent RIA is somehow like of the highest grade monk purity either.
Yeah.
So anyway, but so 2008 was actually turned out to be yet another blessing in disguise.
Got it. Oh, so you were able to acquire more?
Well, I didn't have to acquire. I mean, because I had already. First of all, I spent all the money. So I basically, the money that I had from Priceline and cashing all that out, I had spent some of it on buying that house in Barrington, which by the way, that turned out to be a colossal disaster. And so because I bought it like the height at that time, like 2005, it was very
It
bad
still
timing.
probably hasn't recovered.
Yeah, I sold it and took a bath. I actually wrote an article about it in Forbes.
I did read that.
Yeah, and so I think when you factor everything in, like the new roof and the this and that, I mean, I think I lost probably close to $600,000 on that. So anyway, but the rest of the money I had from I put all into Arete. So I mean, the startup of Arete basically was my $1 million and of everything I had saved and earned at that point. Again, my parents cut me off financially after I left Johns Hopkins. So when I was like 18 years old, I had no family support of any kind. And, the only connections they had were people in the government, so I didn't have, my grandparents were dead. So it's like, I mean, everything had to just be completely myself up by my own bootstraps. And my wife's family also, they all worked for the CIA. So they were not, they didn't give us any money or anything like that. So, I had everything into Arete. I couldn't afford to be buying advisors. I had to just convince them.
Oh, wow.
Okay, just by the sheer, force of personality, honestly, that it was a good move to come over from Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley or wherever they were coming from to Arete. And, obviously I set it up as an independent contractor setup. So of course I was offering higher payouts, but they, of course, then they would have to pay for their own office space and things like that. And then the other thing I did do though was I basically diluted myself. So I also gave them stock in the holding company that owns all the Arete entities as another carrot to get them to come over, particularly the early group. The other good fortune I had was that there was another very high-end independent BDRIA out of Portland, Oregon. It was called Private Consulting Group. They had been formed by a lot of breakaways from Goldman Sachs's ACO unit, which was their high net worth unit that serviced basically the C-suite executives of companies that they had done investment banking work for. And that firm, Private Consulting Group, also got involved in like basically was called a DST, a real estate transaction which is for 1031 exchanges. Yeah, exactly. So this thing turned out to be a giant fraud.
Okay.
They had a colossal product failure, and the firm. This was in 2008 because again the real estate market was going to hell in a handbasket, and so. Long story short is Private Consulting Group was in the process of going out of business. They weren't quite there yet. Their CEO was under extreme regulatory examination. And so I ended up meeting through a lawyer friend of mine. I ended up meeting with their branch manager, their Chicago branch, who then put me in touch with like their Memphis branch, the San Francisco branch, the Salt Lake City. And we did this summit in which we call it the Memphis Summit in the Memphis office of Private Consulting Group. And that was in October of 2008. And all their top like 7 branch leaders were there. And I basically convinced all of them, including their CFO of that firm, to all come over to Arete en masse in exchange for just me giving them a little bit of stock in the company.
Let me ask you a question. So I talked about leadership and your ability to convince people. What do you think it is that you did that engendered so much confidence in you at that moment?
Well, I mean, I would say you have to have, first you kind of have to, I mean, I'm going to say you have to be convincing enough that you have the right strategy. Because if, even if you're an incredibly charismatic person or you're incredibly trustworthy, if you're generally pointing to a direction that seems completely ludicrous, right, then people are not going to follow, right? Yeah. So I think that, you first have to have, there's got to be that sense that the strategy is right. Yeah. There's got to be conviction coming from the leader that conviction then pours over, I think, in terms of the rhetoric. But I do think that the thing that is the major, I'm going to say it's not missing ingredient, but the major ingredient, it really does come down to like, people just have to trust you. Yeah. And they have to feel like, and their engagement with you and the way you engage with them, that, that what I'm telling you is true, or at least, or that I believe it to be as true as possible. Yeah. They have to sense, I think, a certain kind of humility that, that you're open to like, not just suggestion and feedback, but maybe this goes to my thing about being able to pivot and make decisive, like in as much as maybe I've charged headlong into a lot of things in life and I made a lot of like quick, maybe at times overly decisive decisions, and I should have been more. I should have thought a little bit more about it or given it more time to marinate. The one thing though that I also really believe in is, which comes from my training in the great books of Western civilization, is just the way that Socrates would always say the beginning of wisdom is knowing that I do not know. And so it's this kind of an intellectual integrity that says, look, I think this is the right answer, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm 100% sure. And if you have a good suggestion, make that argument, and maybe we'll go. I'm willing to go with you on that in that direction.
Yeah.
So it's that sense that people feel, I think, that I'm willing to pivot, and that they can work with me, and that if they make a good argument that we should go in a different direction, I will listen, and that I will go in that direction.
Yeah. And you have the most skin in the game.
I also had the most skin in the game.
Yeah, that helps a lot.
I definitely had the most skin in the game, right? So I think that was probably pretty compelling as well. They could probably sense, to be honest, a certain amount of desperation in me.
Okay.
A certain amount of, like, I don't know if that's the right word precisely, but I remember one of the guys in the Memphis office, he's now retired. His name was Lee Green. He was a real Southern gentleman kind of guy, a great Southern drawl. And he said, and I want to get this right, but he said something like that. He said the difference between a chicken and the pig. He said something like, I'm like a chicken in my relationship to Arte, because like I'm laying an egg, but like if Arte fails, like I'm still a chicken.
Yeah.
He's like, the difference is you're more like the pig, like you're the bacon in this meal. Like it's sort of like something along those lines. Like, in other words, if Arte fails, I die.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm dead. My life is ruined. I'm bankrupt. I have to start all over again.
Yeah.
Whereas for him, as
He had his book of business.
he has his book of business as
He can
an
go
independent
anywhere
advisor. He can still go to another firm.
Got it. Yeah. No, the reason I brought that up is because I still have this memory that when I think about you, kind of brings me back to when you had left or were pushed out, whatever, out of Ameriprise. Pushed out. That's a better word. And then a whole new management team came in. And this was my first experience in how important leadership and culture is.
Yeah.
Because when you were there, I was fully on board. If you stuck around, I probably would have stuck around Ameriprise. As soon as you left, the whole new management team, that whole office completely disintegrated.
Yeah, I know.
Completely disintegrated.
Yeah. And there was the largest office in the United States too.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's actually amazing.
Yeah.
But that lesson stuck with me in terms of how important it is, how important culture is within an organization.
Totally.
And how, like, so we've had experiences where we brought in the wrong advisor and he got spat out 24, 48, 12 months, 24 months later because he just didn't fit in. Similarly to you, whereas you're looking for advisors that have that asset allocation with alternatives endowment approach.
Yep.
We're the same way. If we're bringing in somebody that just wants to invest in individual stocks, it's not going to fit.
Right. And that's a mismatch that's a mismatch on strategy point, but then there can also just be cultural mismatch too, right?
It's the wrong types of people.
Yeah, right. Yeah, wrong type of person. People who don't put clients' interests first. People who are, capitalism. I still think I'm a believer, but it's like, but there is this dynamic where, if you just are so obsessed with money above all else, then like, where's your humanity? Like, where is there any room for morality and ethics? And I think there, that to me, that's one thing about our business that sometimes upsets me. And I'm getting, I'm turning 50 this year. And one of my advisors in Dallas, he's a huge, like, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger fan, is like just, devours everything they've ever written. And apparently this was said at one Berkshire Hathaway meeting, a big board meeting many years ago. They asked Warren Buffett, how come you've never invested in the wealth management sector? Mm-hmm. And he said, because in my experience, the people who get into wealth management, by and large, not, obviously there's exceptions, by and large, the type of people who get involved in wealth management are overly obsessed with money to the exclusion of everything else. Mm. And he then said, I don't really want to be involved with people like that.
Interesting.
And my experience, like, I recently was thinking about this. Like, I had we've always had very, very good retention at Arte, but recently, I had a longtime advisor that came from Merrill Lynch, has been with us for like 15 years. They left the firm, and really, and at the end of the day, it just came down to, like, he just wanted a little more slice of cake for himself.
Yeah.
And, and it's like, are you kidding me? I mean, you're already getting, as I like to say, you're already getting 90 Skittles out of a bag of 100 Skittles.
Yeah.
You're really going to leave me because you want one more Skittle? Like,
Yeah.
who are you?
Yeah.
And so there is this dynamic in our business that does depress me about that. Like that, I sort of say to myself, like, well, there are a lot of people that are like this, and my reaction to it is sort of twofold. One is okay, I'll just keep trying to find the people that kind of have a little bit more of that blend of humanity and morality and ethics to bring into this business. And then the other thought I have is well, okay, maybe this is my challenge. Maybe this is part of my, the thing I need to do, which is to try to essentially take these people who view life as a zero-sum game, kind of characterized by the old bumper sticker, whoever dies with the most toys at the end wins.
Okay.
And maybe if I could just sort of move them a little bit away from that kind of philosophy toward a little bit more of a humanistic win-win approach in our industry, and a little more loyalty and a little less of this, there is no honor amongst thieves kind of thing. That maybe that's my challenge. Maybe that's one of my purposes.
That's interesting. And the question is can you change those types of people, or do you bring the people that already have that humanity in and breed that type of culture?
It's both. It's both.
Yeah.
You try to. And by the way, I still keep this on my, like, I have a variety of different places where I try to keep different things in mind, like different principles in mind. And I still have always had this Peter Drucker quote, which is very famous in business, which is, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And so I always think a lot about that in terms of culture creation. And so to answer your question though, yes, it is about hiring on the front end, and it's about creating that culture so that you're getting the right people coming into your firm. But I might have told you this years ago, but one thing that I did have good leaders. There were some really good leaders at American Express Financial Advisors and Ameriprise. One of them is a guy named Doug Lennox, who is kind of like, he was great with the culture. And when he left Ameriprise, the whole culture there also got more, this kind of Darwinistic sort of, backstabbing, cutthroat sort of thing that happens in business. But he used to say, listen, there's just like life is like there, people and business, there's a distribution curve, just like in everything, like in Pareto's principle, 80-20 rule. But if you put it more in the context of like, there's A's, there's B's, there's C's, there's D's, it's like, you're never going to really be able to do anything really great. You're not going to be able to really move the ball that far if you have the mentality that like, well, I only want to be surrounded by A players all the time. Yep. And I'm only going to have A players around me. Well, guess what? Like, everybody wants A players. It's super competitive, and there's a very small number of them.
Yeah.
So the key is in order to gain scale, is you have to figure out how to take a C player and just make them into a C+ player, or a B-. So it is about developing people.
Well, 100%.
It is about changing people too. Even that even the example I just brought up of this guy who wants 91 Skittles out of a bag of 100 instead of 90. I look at it as a little bit of a failing on my part that I wasn't able to like philosophically change him.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to educate his soul enough to become a little bit of a better person. And unfortunately, I failed. But that's my job is to try to develop people and I have to try to help them all grow a little bit. And so anyway, that's my thinking.
Which is interesting because, you initially wanted to be a philosophy teacher.
Right.
So you might be able to, you're combining business with philosophy.
I think that's right. And I think I've reframed that too. I have my psychoanalyst, she a couple of years ago, before one of our national conferences, I was like really struggling with what I wanted to do for that speech at that particular time, because I had an unhealthy number. The firm had grown. I had done a number of at this point we had done a number of actual acquisitions, like paying money, and buying firms and things like that. And, sometimes you think the culture is going to fit. And then again, I've made mistakes there too. And turns out the culture didn't fit. So I needed to make a speech that was kind of trying to bring us back to our culture.
Yeah.
And I ended up giving a speech which was totally like out of the box for financial services. Instead of, talking about products and, here's where the industry is going and here's where the markets are going and like, whatever, revenue, profit, money.
Yeah.
Instead, I did a speech that I brought the Shel Silverstein's children's book, or I don't think it's a children's book. It's actually an adult
Giving
book.
Tree?
The Giving Tree.
I love that book.
Right, exactly. And so I did this whole speech about the Giving Tree. And then I actually bought a copy of the Giving Tree for every single person. We had 363 advisors at that point. There's probably 400 people in the room plus sponsors.
Yeah.
And it was, and what I was really getting at was this idea of being more like the Giving Tree as opposed to being like the boy or the man who's just constantly taking, and like cutting down the tree.
Until there's nothing left.
Right, until there's nothing left, because they're just filled with never-ending want. And so that, and my psychoanalyst said that maybe this is like, again, maybe you need to reframe this as this is how you can actually make a positive impact, is if you could take a bunch of, let's call it finance bros.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you can take a bunch of finance bros who think that, who just, life is all about more material wealth.
Yeah.
More, how can I get a, $250,000 Patek Philippe, and, I need a yacht or something, filled with, whatever, 20 bikini clad babes, and I've got to have the Lambo. And I mean, it's like, how can I take those kind of people, which there are unfortunately probably too many.
That's what Wall Street attracts.
Right, exactly. So maybe that's my mission, is to sort of try to just bring them back a little bit from that, with something like the Giving Tree.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I'm failing miserably, to be honest.
That's a hard one. I mean, that might be one of those things that's
really hard.
impossible.
It's really hard because the society is built around just constantly. You think about like with the experience of Instagram and the algorithms. What does it do? It's just feeding into that never-ending materialistic want. Whatever it is, it may be. I mean, materialistic, sexual, whatever it is. All the hedonistic desires are served up for you on a never-ending platter, and so all it's doing is just increasing your hedonistic want. And I think it's actually therefore hollowing out our souls. Now I'm starting to sound like what's his name? The guy who's trying to ban all the cell phones in schools, the smartphones. It's a professor at NYU.
I couldn't agree with him more. I mean, honestly. So just from my perspective, first, I don't have Instagram. I wake up every day. I meditate every morning, because I know that if I don't do that and I go into the real world and you have all these things bouncing at you, you're going to be reactive. You're going to want this because I'm built to be competitive. And if you're doing better than me, then I get like, why are you doing better than me? I want that too. Mm-hmm. So I feel like starting every morning, if you're religious, people pray.
Yep.
But if I'm starting every morning has been able to reset me and recalibrate me and ultimately help remind me of what's important and what brings fulfillment.
100%.
And it's not like buying a watch or having another good car.
Right.
Because that stuff is, you have that and you want more.
Exactly. And then you inevitably you kind of just like, it becomes boring. There is that thrill, there is that initial period when something is new, but look, there's a lot of wisdom in, it's like those ancient people, or like, since I'll go there with you a little bit on the religion thing, and I love that you're meditating. I mean, there's a reason why for like, what is it now? 3,000 plus years, like, the idea that, in the morning when you first wake up, that you should meditate, pray, remind yourself of the commandments,
be grateful,
be grateful, remind yourself of the mitzvahs. These things are there's that wisdom, it turns out, really helps to like ground you and set you for the, and it's really important that it be done first thing in the morning, right? When you wake up, like, I mean, that.
And now look at your phone.
And you can't look at your phone. No, you can't. No, I mean,
that's
I
poison
actually
to the brain.
got I'm so sick. I hate the phone so much. that I got a old-fashioned alarm clock.
Okay.
Because I don't want to have to pick up I had been using the alarm on the phone to wake up for so many years. So I now have an old-fashioned alarm clock that, as opposed to I don't look at the phone at the very first thing that I do when I wake up. And then the other thing I've started doing, which I probably told you about, is I've gone hardcore technology free, starting like as soon as Friday sundown until Saturday sundown.
Sabbath.
I just literally power down. I have 2 phones now because thank you SEC for, monitoring everything in my life. I now have to have 2 phones. Anyway, I bottom line is I shut it all off because I don't even want I use other technology. Like, of course, I'll drive
my car.
I'll drive my kid to, soccer practice or whatever. But the main thing is I just need 24 hours to not look at these darn devices.
Yeah.
And how much you think about how much like stress and anxiety they've now built into our day-to-day lives. Like my wife works at YouTube, which is owned by Google, and they're so addicted to their devices that it's like now the expectation, I'm sure you've experienced this, is people are like, they send an email and the expectation is if you don't respond immediately, then you're like delaying, and now you're like not as good of a worker. So now all of a sudden everyone's working 24/7.
Yep.
It's anyway, it's totally messing with our heads.
Completely. I'm doing everything I can not to fall into that type of culture.
Yeah. I think I give you I know your passion for rock climbing, and that's a situation where if you're on the side of a mountain out in nature, you're not like, let me take a look at my phone right now. Let's check,
I don't do that.
Let me dangle here with only one hand and while I'm looking at Instagram with the other.
Well, speaking of thinking with the little head, not the big head, there was one time 10 years ago when I was dating a girl and I was being responsive. That was the first and last time I did that.
Yes.
But yes, for the most part, the reason I love climbing so much and the reason I love meditating is climbing specifically forces you to be in the moment.
Exactly.
You have no choice.
Exactly.
Right. So that's one thing I love about
a lot of I used to be a huge Tim Ferriss fan. Exactly. So Tim, and I still really respect him, and honestly, like, he deserves all the success he's earned because he's provided so much value and insight.
Yeah.
So many people over the years. One of the things he's been doing along the same lines of what you're talking about, he's really gotten into archery.
Oh yeah.
Lately. And and it's really all about this idea of achieving total focus and being able to ignore the other things. For me, I've tried a lot of different things. I did a lot of off-road motorcycling for a long time, which was fantastic. As I'm kind of getting older, I'm like, not sure if maybe that period of my life is over. But for me, definitely reading has always been my way of. There's just so much knowledge. That's so many great things that have been written and said by our ancestors and by
Do you have a favorite book, like a favorite ancient book? If you had to pick one, is that even possible?
That's so hard right now. I mean,
I read a lot of Stoicism.
A
lot of Seneca.
That's good. Good man. I give a lot of credit to Ryan Holiday for kind of bringing the Stoics back into the popular consciousness. Of course, Marcus Aurelius Meditations is phenomenal. My most recent book I categorized as like a mixture between meditations, kind of meets like the poetry of Rumi, sort of, and meets like maybe like Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. So, but definitely Marcus Aurelius inspired me along the lines that, you don't have to, in order to get a book out there, and, you don't have to like sit down and somehow, I have to write the perfect novel. What Marcus Aurelius' Meditations proves, which is arguably one of the most popular like ancient philosophy books in the world, is that you can just, if you just keep a good diary, you could actually like publish your diary, or you could edit it and take things out. But the idea of writing a little bit every single day, and then and Montaigne, same way. Montaigne, his essays are very similar to Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. So I think both of them are a really good role models for phenomenal books of philosophy that in a sense are kind of just like an edited version of their personal diaries. So, but I guess to answer your question, favorite ancient book, man, I'm tempted to say Bible, but I've
never read the Bible.
Really?
Yeah, maybe I should read that.
Maybe you should.
Okay. I mean, it's the most famous book.
Yeah,
of all
yeah,
time.
yeah. I mean, I think I think that
Okay.
in terms of like pound for pound, total
Yeah.
amount of life wisdom,
That's the one.
pretty tough to beat. Pretty
Okay.
tough to beat. Yeah.
Okay.
But I guess the other one I would probably say would be got to be something Plato. One of the Platonic dialogues. I'll just kind of say that in general. The Platonic dialogues.
I'm gonna add
would be my
I'm gonna add
favorite.
the Bible and Platonic dialogues. to my
Yes,
reading
I
list.
highly recommend. Great thing about Platonic dialogues is, with the exception maybe of the Republic, which is really kind of a true book, most of the other dialogues are just like you think. They're conversations between Socrates and whoever his interlocutor is. So these are not like long. They're intense and deep reads, but they're not long reads. So yeah, I would highly recommend that. Actually, this is for whatever reason I have a desire to tell you about my 50th birthday celebration coming up that I'm doing.
When do you
It's
turn
very much
50?
on March 31st.
Okay.
So what I've decided to do is and by the way, and I love you, so I'm gonna sort of say I apologize in advance. Like you didn't get invited
It's
to
okay.
this
We haven't
event.
talked a lot.
We
Yeah,
haven't
so
talked a
it's
whole
okay.
lot.
I
You know what I mean?
thought
But had we been talking even more, you might have gotten invited to
it's
this
okay.
event.
It's okay.
But basically, what I'm doing is I'm hosting a Platonic symposium.
Okay.
Which, think of it as, it's a a group of, a symposium was like kind of like a wine drinking party.
Mm-hmm.
But there would be like a subject matter or a book that everyone had to read.
Okay.
And then the idea is they would be discussing this in depth over the course of multiple hours while also drinking wine and kind of getting increasingly drunk as the evening went on. So I'm hosting this symposium for what I'm kind of calling loosely my Josh's Jedi Council. And what it is these are the 18 people that I've personally met, and that have become at least somewhat decent friends, but that I view as being the wisest people I've met so far in my first 50 years.
Wow.
And so I'm hosting this I'm choosing the subject matter. So the question of the symposium is, what is time?
Okay.
And we're reading 3 different books. We're reading Einstein, his special theory of relativity. We're reading a book by a Christian theologian from Sweden, Thorleif Bowman, called Hebrew Thought versus Greek Thought in Language. And then we're reading Abraham Joshua Heschel's book, The Sabbath, which is actually also about time. And so we're going to have a 2.5 hour long seminar about this topic of what is time? Is it real? Is it not? Is it an illusion? And then followed by like a dinner and then a very rare spirits tasting. And I've no expenses been spared. We're getting only spirits that were bottled in 1975, my birth year, from around the world. So it'll be a rare spirits tasting after that. So anyway, I don't know why I decided, but I just want to share that.
I mean, that's on par with, in terms of what we talked about, and on par with Josh Rogers.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, when I tell people about this is
I'm
my
not
birthday
surprised.
party. Yeah, everyone's like, that is the coolest thing I've ever heard. So I don't know. I just decided I wanted to tell you about the Jedi Council roundtable.
Love it.
Yeah,
Love it. Well, I feel like we could spend hours talking about this.
we could. We could. I mean, like when
Folks in the camera crew, this
Yeah, right,
kind
right,
of
yeah,
time.
yeah. Oh, yeah. If they have the time, I don't know how we're doing. Maybe this is a good natural point to stop. Whatever you.
No, I have a few other questions that I want to kind of hear from you. But so, in terms of, you've been so good, I feel like, at spotting trends. So you sounded like you spotted some trends at Ameriprise in terms of which direction the wealth management industry was going. You try to convince people at Ameriprise they didn't want to hear it, to their demise, I guess, to some extent.
Well, they eventually ended up changing and came around exactly to my strategy. And in a weird way, I did get a nice call from Jim Cracchiolo like years later, where he basically said, "Yeah, you were right all along." And it was really quite nice.
That's
And
a good feeling.
Very, very Menchie move on his part.
Good. But now that you're in it, and you've built a great business. I think how much you have under management?
We are at about 8 billion of AUM.
That's amazing. What do you see as the future? Obviously, talk a little bit about technology, talk about the direction the wealth management industry is going.
Yeah.
And then maybe talk a little bit about where you see yourself 10 years from now.
Okay. So I think that probably no big surprise that I say this. I do think that AI is a significant threat to a big portion of the wealth management industry. I think that there is going to be. I think the wealth management industry is going to have to become smaller. I think that there's just not going to be the same amount of the same that if I and what I mean by that is the total number of humans that are employed in the wealth management industry and the total number of firms.
Yeah.
Both of them, I think, will have to get smaller.
Yeah.
I think that there will be a lot of sort of a mixture of more roll-ups, more consolidation.
Absolutely.
But then with that consolidation, there also has to be like basically, unfortunately, a cutting of human beings, the whole thing has to get smaller and more efficient. And at the same time, the larger firms that have enough scale, because profit margins are just continually getting smaller, smaller, and smaller. You have to have scale in order to be able to still make money. I think actually that I'm really concerned about like the future of like the clearing firms over on the broker dealer side, like basically NFS, Fidelity, NFS, and Pershing. I actually think that if you look at it, like the amount of money that LPL has spent in the last few years, like buying firms, buying RIAs, et cetera, and or just in their recruiting offers, right, where they're giving huge upfronts to guys, but people with 92% payouts. You're like, you look at the numbers, it doesn't even begin to pencil out. Basic math, like why are they giving all that money? Here's the answer: they're self-clearing. Same thing with Ameriprise. If you're self-clearing and you're making money on cash and you're making money on all the transactional volume and you're making money on all the under the table, like what I'll call banking, like under the table, like charging every IRA account an annual custodial fee of $90.
Yep.
And now you multiply that across hundreds of thousands of accounts. It's kind of becoming a little bit more like a commercial banking model.
Okay.
Again, very, very thin margin, but you have to have big scale. That's the reason why you saw, commercial banks consolidate. Every small regional bank eventually sells to a larger one. They're just kind of like the food chain of big shark eats smaller, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same thing that's going to happen in our industry. So I think that the only space for human financial advisors will be kind of essentially for people who have enough money that they can afford the luxury of kind of having a human financial advisor that is more than anything kind of like a mixture of like a money psychologist, behavioral, the whole behavioral finance trend. I think there is some truth to that, but I kind of call it more money psychologist, behavioral psychologist, somebody that has tremendous people skills and it has the ability to also tell some of these clients like no. Or to say, listen, your behavior needs to change or else you're really not going to be able to do all these things. Or someone who has the ability to be like a consigliere to a family, because I see a lot of high net worth. One of the things I'm seeing more and more is that with high net worth and ultra high net worth, their kids, the next generations, they're, in my opinion, really struggling to become self-viable in some way. There's a tremendous amount of like over-reliance on the money of the parents. And I mean, and they're just not, they don't seem to have the fire in the belly to like do something on their own. And I think, so what I'm getting at is if you need, like, I imagine if you remember The Godfather, like the very first Godfather, Marlon Brando, Robert Duvall plays, he's not a member of the family, but he's the consigliere. He's not of the family, but he's very much in the family. And it's his job to like do a lot of the dirty work. It's his job to have the conflict proficient conversations that the Godfather doesn't want to have with his sons. Right? That's kind of what I see as being the future of like where there's a human financial advisor involved, but it's going to be mostly with wealthier families. Family, probably realistically, I see like historically the family office cutoff has been like maybe 50 million. If you have less than 50 million, it doesn't make sense to have your own family office. I think that might come down a little bit. You're seeing that with like Crescent and a lot of these, some of these other players are trying to like create multi-family offices with families that have 30 million, 40 million. So maybe there's a possibility there where you could have a consigliere for maybe 3 families. But that's kind of where I see the financial advisor going. But the idea of a financial advisor sitting behind a computer screen and like really picking anything from an investment perspective, I see that as really going the way of the dodo bird. I do think that alts are going to continue to be a bigger percentage of people's portfolios. But I also think that we are going to eventually find more ways to achieve liquidity in in what has historically been very illiquid alts. So I see a development of a lot more secondary markets. Like you're sort of seeing that with this company Forge, where they're creating more of a secondary market for private shares because so many more companies are staying private. Maybe with, I mean, I don't want to get into the politics of things, but with more deregulation and with like basically if we could somehow weaken the SEC, then maybe there'll be more publicly traded companies again. But the reality is unless that becomes an extended trend, I don't know, man. I see more and more companies remaining private, and the total number of publicly traded companies right now in the United States, it's the smallest it's ever been in our entire history.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's I don't want to misquote for this session. I don't want to say something that's totally off. I'll just leave it at we have the smallest number of publicly traded companies that we've ever had in the United States because the regulatory burden, the cost burden is crazy.
But to your point, the secondary market is becoming so developed that these companies have less of incentive to go public.
Correct. Right. So alts will become more liquid.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying. And that therefore they will become a bigger percentage of people's portfolios. You're seeing such a big movement of like private equity coming more into like what I'll call our space, the high net worth retail space. Seeing the venture capitals trying to figure out a way to kind of get into our space because they've tapped out all the institutional fundraising they can do. They've tapped out until they get more rotation of capital, which isn't happening, and getting money circulating again back to those investors. The only way for them to raise new funds is kind of by coming down a layer into our layer of the cake. So, all right. So and then there was one, and then
the last question,
where am I going to be doing in 10
Yeah.
years? I am not, God willing, I'm not going to be in this business anymore. I honestly, I'm trying to, I would be happy at this point to hand over the reins to somebody else.
Okay.
If you want to be the CEO of Arte, I'm interviewing. You would be great. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think I would step back into like the chairman role, or I'd love to sell it, or merge it into some other, larger competitor. I think this time period for me, I mean, I've been at it now for 18 years, just with Arte.
Yeah.
And then, in terms of being in this business now, I'm right at like 25 years.
Okay.
So that's enough. That's a quarter of a lifetime.
Yeah.
It's time for me to move on. So I think I'm sort of leaning toward what, once I'm able to successfully kind of, transition past this stage of life, I'm probably either going to, go get a graduate degree in, I'm going to finally do the philosophy thing, either go to University of Chicago, become a philosophy, do something in that area, or maybe even, theology, divinity school, one of kind of in that zone. Or I'm also considering maybe going to rabbinical school.
Okay.
And kind of that, what I like about that is that it's a little bit more hands-on leadership of a community. Okay. And I really kind of like the idea of sort of being more of like a shepherd, and like really kind of authentically, I feel like, helping people. I'm a little worried about academia. I don't know, like I don't want to just be closeted away and like giving some lectures here and there and having to write books, feel the pressure of writing all the time. Yeah. I still like the idea of like working with my fellow humans and trying to help us all.
And give back spiritually.
Yeah, give back. Exactly. I think if I can help people, advance a little bit, spiritually and as a person, that also helps me advance personally as well. Helps me become a better person.
So there's definitely a lot of need for that.
I think there is. I think that's, by the way, if you want to talk about being a trend spotter, here are some major trends that you're seeing right now. Massive increase interest in psychedelics as an avenue into spirituality, and as well as solving all the immense amount of mental health issues that we have in this country, which is probably fed by the pharmaceutical industry because they want everyone on SSRIs, right? And we know we can get everyone off SSRIs by just using natural plant-based.
Which to meditate.
Or meditation, exactly. So
looking at your phone,
right,
stop
looking at your phone. There's and there's also just like. How I want to put it, just like when you had like the Reformation by Martin Luther, there was like a counter-Reformation. Yeah. So what's happening is we've had a solid 125 years plus of like nihilism and and like a postmodernist like sort of
materialism.
Again, just materialism and nihilism. And so what the new trend is a real comeback toward religion.
Yeah.
And people because people realize they need community. We are community-based animals.
Yep.
You know, I mean, we're community-based. I don't want to say we're just animals because we're more than that. But it's like we need community. We become way too isolated. COVID only made that even worse. And like and people need something bigger than themselves. If all there is in life is whoever dies with the most toys wins, you know, or whatever, you know, getting plastic surgery, so you know, so you can try to remain young forever. So all this insanity, you know, those are major trends. And so frankly, I kind of want to get. I want to get in front of that trend. I've always been early on trends.
Yeah.
You know, I was there for, you know, and so I really think that's where humanity is headed right now in terms of this next cycle, which I think, by the way, is I think that is going to be tremendously positive for humanity and overall happiness for everyone. If you know, on that.
I'd like to be an inaugural member of your congregation.
Oh, thank you, bro. Thank you. Well, I am starting. What I'm doing is a small thing. It's not a congregation, but I'm starting. I'm building out a library that is kind of like because I as you know, I have a ton of books, and it's basically there'll be like a library seminar center where I'm just gonna have a big table in the middle of the library, and you know, you can have up to 20 people, and the idea is like, you know, I'll be sending out to you. It's kind of like a reading group. Yeah. But it's like, hey, you know, come and let's do a seminar, symposium on this book. And I just want to, and it's only gonna be 20 people at a time. And it's not lecturing, no lectures.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll be there, but I'm just a fellow learner with everybody else. I'm a facilitator and a fellow learner who's still learning, still trying to figure things out. You know, just like Socrates always said, you know, the only thing I know is that I do not know. And also that the unexamined life is not worth living. So that's something I am in the process of building.
Love it. And I'd love to join.
Yeah, you're in.
Josh, this has been a great conversation.
Right.
I knew it would be.
Thank you, bro. Thank you. Yeah. Well, it's great being with you as always, and I hope this hope it helps advance your goals.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm really happy for you how well you've done. It doesn't surprise me how well you've done, by the way. But you know, you're a class act and very, very sharp. Oh, I always knew you're a super sharp young man. So you're not that young anymore. We're getting older.
I'm 40.
But yeah, I know. I'm very proud of you, though.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. It means a lot.
All right. Yeah, you bet. Yeah, I bet.